As a podcast host, or soon-to-be podcast host, there is nothing worse than putting in the effort to create your podcast, putting out new episodes every single week, promoting those episodes diligently on your social media, your email list, maybe even doing some podcast guesting here and there, only to see the same flat download numbers staring back at you from your analytics dashboard. And fellow podcast host and PodLaunch graduate Amy Castro was right there too. In fact, she had rebranded her podcast once already, and then realized it still wasn't reaching the right people. But instead of giving up, as most podcasters would have, she decided to bring in some outside eyes to help her spot what was missing. And the result was a top 10 chart debut in her category and hundreds of new downloads rolling in overnight. And in this episode, you're going to hear exactly how Amy shifted her positioning to finally attract the right listeners, and how you can use the same approach to stop talking to the same 100 people every week and start reaching new listeners who are already searching for what you have to offer. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I am so excited that you are here and to break down all that we're going to talk about regarding your recent podcast relaunch. But first, for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about what your podcast is about.
My podcast is all about trying to help pet parents hang on to their pets and live a happy life and not pull their hair out.
Oh my gosh. So relatable. As I was literally, before we hit record, telling you how my dog will literally come jump on my lap and start licking me in the middle of stuff. I'm like, you got to stay out of my office when I'm doing this stuff. And actually, what I find so fascinating about your story is that you started your show back in February of 2023, and you had rebranded it once already before our paths crossed. Thinking back to that time, what led you to rebrand it the first time?
Well, the original show was part of the education arm of Starlight Outreach and Rescue. And so we named it Starlight Pet Talk. Made sense, went hand in hand. And as I started getting kind of closer to the decision of, to be perfectly honest, getting out of rescue, I needed to separate that brand and make the show something else. Another factor I think that fed into it was just wanting to be more me and more direct than I might have been when I was representing the rescue. And so I think it's kind of like the difference between representing a business in a professional way and then maybe being a little bit more personal and being yourself.
Yes, so relatable in a lot of ways. And I know those listening, many of them can see themselves in that as well. What was so fascinating too was when you first met with our team, I know you mentioned one of your biggest frustrations with your show, which you had rebranded to Muddy Paws and Hairballs, was trying to decide where to put your energy because you kept making changes. You were not seeing results. So aside from that rebrand, what were some of the things that you had tried specifically that hadn't worked?
I think trying to go the social media route and thinking that I was going to build from there. What I found was the more I did in social media, the more I was simply reaching the same people. And it's like, that doesn't grow a podcast. So you get the same people downloading every week, then your numbers kind of stay the same every single week. So, and I did try some advertising, mixed reviews on that. And, it's limited time, limited budget. I'm constantly looking for what is the best use of all of that, to put my energy into.
Yes, as are we all. It's one of those things, especially. So as a podcast host, for sure, you have to make these decisions. And as a podcast host who has a business behind the podcast, it almost magnifies that even more. We want to make sure that we're getting some sort of ROI from our podcast. So Amy, before we dig into your launch results, which we're going to unpack here in just a second, I would love it if you would give us the big reveal of the new branding and the positioning of your show.
All right. So the big reveal is the Pet Parent Hotline, which I think is much more on target for my audience.
Yes. Well, much more search friendly too. But aside from that, how are you feeling about the alignment of that show compared to previous versions of your show?
Well, the title and then all of the work that went behind the things that we did at Pod Launch really allowed me to focus. I thought I had a clear idea of who my audience was and what they needed. And it has gotten so much more focused and narrow. And I think that makes the whole thing better.
Okay, well, that's where I want to dig in, is that work behind the scenes that went into it. And this is something that is really, really, it can feel intangible, especially when you're looking from the outside in. We all see these successful podcasts and we're like, oh my gosh, it's just so easy for them. And we can assume all these things about these podcasts, but we don't always see the work that goes in behind the scenes. So our paths crossed. You joined us in our pod launch world. Were there any parts of the pod launch process that felt particularly challenging for you, or on the flip side, particularly insightful for you?
The psychographic process and really honing in on, who is my audience and what is it that they need. I had a pretty good demographic idea of who my audience was, and that held true. And I had done work in creating avatars, but what I was missing and what you helped me with was actually bringing them alive and having those avatars and that psychographic be the filter for everything for the show. And it's such a huge difference. Previously, I had created the avatars and then I set them aside and I kind of just did stuff that I wanted to talk about or I thought they needed, and it wasn't targeted enough.
Yeah, it's so funny as well. Because as we sit here, Amy, I have to chuckle a little bit because the psychographic is the thing that in the moment, clients hate us the most
Oh,
for.
yeah.
They're like, this is hard. Why are you making me do this? Like, I got into this program, like with all these big visions to grow my podcast, and this is really difficult. I don't want to. And it's like literally the first thing that we have everybody do. And after the fact, it's the thing that they thank us for. And it's like, this is why we hold your feet to the fire in that, because the interesting thing about our listener is that our listener is always evolving in a way as well. And so going through this process can definitely help to get more of that clarity for sure and specificity around what is going through your listener's mind that would even cause them to look for a podcast like yours in the first place. And now how can we align everything you're doing on the podcast to make sure those listeners find you? And so it's a deeper starting point than most people start with, like a typical podcast avatar, like a marketing avatar. So it already takes it levels deeper. But then that's your foundation. And now as you go on, see, and you can tell I'm like getting so excited about this because this is the thing, right? This is the thing that is missing so often. Like when I audit a podcast, it's the missing thing because now it becomes the foundation for as you continue to grow as a podcast host that you're going to be thinking about leaning into, making all the decisions for your podcast. Like you said, that lens through which now you can see your show and make sure that all the time you're putting into it is on the right things and meant to connect with that listener. So anyway, I had to go on like a little tangent there because I do get excited about this work, because I get excited when our clients get excited because then they see like why this is so powerful. Okay. Psychographic aside, I am curious to know if you had to pick one of the frameworks or one of the strategies that you learned inside our accelerator, what would you say was the most impactful one for you? And how has that helped you? What are some of the tangible results you're experiencing from that?
I think the whole thing was just a bit eye-opening. Right now, the thing that's so front of mind is the SEO piece. I think that is such an underutilized piece of gold in trying to achieve goals and objectives and really focusing so that you're actually reaching those people. It's one thing to identify them, which is great. But right now, I think the big piece is the SEO piece and how that ties into, like I said, reaching the people. I know who they are. I want to get to them. How am I getting to them in an organic way? And that's one of the ways to do it.
Yes, 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 yes. So much so. And I think honestly, a lot of what we do in Pod Launch is teaching you to think differently about your show. And then once you learn how to do that, it does become so second nature now as you're going forward into planning your marketing efforts, into planning your content, into planning anything else. Because to your point, we got to know who we're speaking to, but then we also need to know how to get our podcast in front of those people. And SEO certainly being a very, very powerful way and very up and coming way, honestly, in the industry to do that. It's been around forever, but we now have ways to track it so you can actually see the return that it brings to your show to essentially tell Apple and Spotify, hey, these are the listeners I'm looking to reach. Now put my show in front of them. So I can go down another rabbit hole, but I'm going to spare everybody. I want to dig into your launch, Amy. I'm curious, before we get into the numbers, what would you say was something that surprised you about your launch?
I think how easy it was when you follow a logical process and how stupid I was to not have done it that way the first time. Like I didn't launch my show. I mean, I put out an episode the day that it started and then I sat and watched for downloads. I mean, I told friends, but there was no strategy whatsoever in the launch. And this was definitely something that had a true strategy. And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't really thinking it was going to work because it was a relaunch of a relaunch, or a relaunch on the back of a relaunch, I should say. And it still worked. That was a big surprise.
Yes. Well, and also too, let me just call this out. You are not stupid. You just simply didn't know what you didn't know.
Right.
And this is so common. It's super common. And I see it in business and in marketing all the time, but I see it often in podcasting too, because there's this thought in the industry that podcasting is easy and that when you get into podcasting, all you have to do is have a good quality mic, you have to have good quality audio, and you have to just put out content consistently. And that's all it takes. That's all it's going to take to grow. And then people get into it and they realize, no, that's not what it takes because I'm doing those things and I'm not seeing the growth. And so I think this is a really important thing to call out because, yes, we need to build a marketing plan around the show. But even prior to that, we need to introduce that show to the world. Okay, so for your relaunch, you did this one differently. We rebranded everything. And then you dropped with what, 6 episodes on launch day?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So 6 new episodes dropping on the day of your launch, and then the consistency in the 1 episode a week, same day of the week. What was the primary show category that you positioned your show in?
Pets and animals under kids and family.
Yes. So kids and family, pets and animals. We're relaunching the show on a dedicated day of the week. We're dropping 6 episodes on that day. And you had gathered about 50 or so people together kind of ahead of time to say, get their commitment and say like, yes, I'll go in, I'll listen to your show on launch day. I'll leave a rating and review. I'll support the show. I'll hit follow, follow the show. And those people did those things. And in fact, not even 100% of them did. Because I remember you mentioned this in your launch debrief. You were like, gosh darn it, like not even 100% of the people like showed up even when they said they would. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like when you invite people to a party and like you get those cancellations the day of, it's like you're always going to have some of that. With that, how many downloads did you get in that launch window, that 24-hour launch window?
A little over 650, like 670, somewhere in that zone.
Okay. All right. So a little like 650 to 670. We had 6 episodes. So I'm not the greatest at doing math in my head, but that's a little bit over 100 downloads per episode if we were kind of averaging it out.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. I have a bachelor's in English lit. So, doing math in my head like terrifies me. All right. So you got an average of just over 100 downloads an episode. Did you break the Apple Top 100?
I did. And that was a shocker.
You did. Okay. Tell us all about that. What countries did you break it in and what numbers?
In the US, that was, of course, the biggest shocker because I'll be honest, I had hit in the top 100 momentarily with a few episodes over the last 2 years in other countries and once in the US early on. And other than that, it's been very, very inconsistent sitting down in the, I guess what part of it was surprising part was not realizing that you can be down in the 200 and something or in the 180 something. And with a handful of episodes pop up that high. So it was pretty exciting.
Yes. Yes. Number 7 in the USA in pets and animals. I also have here number 11 in Italy, and then top 100 in Denmark and Germany, right there on the cusp in Canada. This is incredible because a couple of things. First of all, what a lot of people don't realize, while some categories can be pretty competitive, meaning you might need more downloads than we're talking about here to rank in those categories, that's usually the exception, not the rule. In most categories, you don't need as many downloads as you might think to break into the top 100. What matters is the window in which those downloads and that activity on your podcast comes into play. Because when Apple and Spotify are seeing engagement on your show, not just downloads, but downloads and people hitting follow and people hitting play and people actually listening, and then there's some ratings coming in, there's some reviews coming in. It's looking at all of those signals over that window of time, which give or take 24 to 48 hours. And it's saying, okay, wow, this show's really getting some traction. And that is what drives the charts. And so this is where, and we can get deeper into it, but essentially, in a nutshell, that's kind of what's going on. And so you see some of the shows that are at the top of the charts every week, who knows? They might even be paying for traffic to make sure that that is coming in that window. If you have budget, you could certainly do that. And you would be ranking your podcast. But I'm a big proponent of organic growth. And while I do think ads have their place, I want to make sure that a show has the right foundation in place first so that we can grow from there. And the beauty of having these numbers, and first of all, it's so exciting and congratulations that you had these results, which is amazing. And now I'm curious to know, okay, how is this informing your marketing going forward? Because you've got some really valuable data now that we know if you want to keep ranking, then we just simply need to keep hitting those numbers within that window week over week over week. So let's kind of talk going forward over the next 90 days or so with your podcast. How are you using that launch data to inform the marketing strategy that you're building for your show?
I think definitely looking at which of the 6, because some of them were interviews, some of them were solos, some of them were focused on very more specific things that were tied to my psychographic, and other ones were things that I was like, hey, I already have this recorded. I'll just throw that into the mix. And so it really gives me a feel for what people are drawn to, what's going to drive that traffic. And so that has been super helpful. And so now my brain is just constantly thinking about, I don't want it to be repetitive and constantly, like finances is a huge one. And people are trying to save money on their vet care, on their pet food, because it's super expensive. But I don't want to just hit it from that same angle and thinking that I can use that as a formula. But it really helps me stay in the mind of the person who's looking for solutions in those areas, and how can I provide those solutions. So it's really helped me, even screening guests. And in the beginning, it was such an honor that somebody would reach out and want to be on my show. And it's like, you could just say the word pet and it's like, I'd at least think about it. And now it's like, how does that feed into these things that I'm trying to actually accomplish? Whereas it's great, you loved your pet, you wrote a book about your pet. How does that really tie to my audience? Because they don't really care. The other piece that I've realized too is that many of the things that I thought would be of interest to pet lovers previously, and it might be, but it's not the immediate need that they're going to say, oh, I want to go listen to this podcast episode right now about that. But you talk about saving money on your vet bill. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to sign up for that right now and listen to that. So it's a huge difference in focus.
This is so key. And Amy, I'm so glad you're digging deep into and just looking at where the numbers are pointing. That's how I like to look at any data when it comes to podcasts. It's like, where is this pointing us? Where is this showing us? Because, we may not see the whole path ahead of us, but we can see the next few steps. And so we know how many downloads it took to rank on launch day. We know the window of time that those needed to come in. So now that becomes our baseline goal for marketing. And you already mentioned SEO, and it's like, you're doing the exact right thing where it's like, okay, now let me see what episodes really resonated and what my listeners are actually looking for and actually searching for, and kind of where the intersection of that meets the passion that I have too for the topics and things. And so now we can start to leverage SEO to help more of those listeners find that show when those episodes drop. And of course, beyond that, where's the low-hanging fruit? What can we do consistently over the next 90 days that fits your budget, that fits your bandwidth, to help drive toward that goal of getting those listens and downloads coming in that window? So it's like when you start to see the whole picture of how it all comes together, I don't know about you, but for me, it gets really exciting. And I feel like I see that excitement in you at this point in your podcasting journey. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
More so than you've had before, maybe in the past.
Yes. I need tangible stuff. And so the sitting around and waiting for things to happen is not really a strong suit of mine. So having active things that I can do to manipulate the direction is a huge piece for me.
I love it. Well, as we wrap up here, I'm curious to know if there's a top lesson that you've learned throughout this journey that someone right now listening who maybe was in your shoes, they're in your shoes right now, the shoes you were in a few months ago. What do you want them to know?
It's cliche to say it, but you don't know what you don't know. And so opening yourself when you realize you're hitting a point where you're not getting the results that you're looking for, you can either give up, which I think a lot of people do, or you can look elsewhere, look for other solutions. And I think that's a big piece. If you want it badly enough, you're going to find that. And you just have to go looking for it.
Perfect mic drop to end on. Amy, thank you for being here today. Thank you for the work that you're doing, both in the world and in the podcasting space. I really appreciate you.
Well, same here. I mean, your program has been fantastic for me. I'm so glad I did it, even though I thought I was already going in the right direction. I realized I wasn't.
Well, I'm glad you had that realization. I'm glad you didn't give up. And I'm glad that you've got a very clear path forward for where you're headed with your show.
Well, thank you so much.
And speaking of getting new listeners to your podcast, did you know that there are actually 3 critical points of conversion in every single listener's journey? Yep, and unless all three are working together to move listeners through your podcast funnel, it's going to feel impossible to grow your audience, to keep listeners coming back, and to ultimately drive revenue through your show. And that's why in the next episode, I am answering a listener question about this exact problem. What to do when people tell you they love your podcast, but you're not seeing that translate into dollars in your bank account. We're going to break down what these 3 points of conversion are and how to optimize for each one of them to make sure that your podcast is doing its job of growing your reach and your revenue. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.